These are all the federal intelligence agencies that defend Mexico against lethal national security threats. Centro Nacional de Inteligencia. The Centro Nacional de Inteligencia is Mexico's flagship civilian national intelligence center for strategic warning. Strategic warning is the mandate. Organic law pairs the Ley Orgánica del Centro Nacional de Inteligencia with Ley de Seguridad Nacional, clauses tied to the 2018 reform package. Headquarters work sits in Mexico City, while policy literature implies regional cells without publishing street addresses. Analysts fuse organized crime, terrorism, espionage, and hybrid threat reporting defined in statute, while counterintelligence targets institutional compromise rather than street arrests. Coordination lines reach armed forces intelligence, federal security institutions, and foreign partners under approved exchange rules, while classified assessments feed cabinet prevention. Public pages stress early warning instead of courtroom exhibits. Statutes label the CNI as CISEN's legal successor and the lead non-uniform body carrying the national intelligence brand. Congressional hearings from 2018 through 2020 captured overlapping mandates while the center absorbed CISEN personnel, databases, and missions. That window overlapped the Guardia Nacional's constitutional birth, a stress test for reading Mexican security politics year by year. Oversight fights revisit civilian control, classified reporting to chambers, and Comisión Nacional de los Derechos Humanos complaint channels after scandal spikes. Civilian-led strategic fusion differs from Secretaría de la Defensa Nacional service intelligence tied to military campaigns. Prosecutors at the Fiscalía General de la República build courtroom dossiers, while suspicious transaction traffic belongs to the Unidad de Inteligencia Financiera. Merida-era and post-Merida papers still stress cross-boundary information sharing, while GAO 12-45 names vetted unit oversight vocabulary with federal partners. Wilson Center and Council on Foreign Relations Mexico explainers add English framing, yet defer to Diario Oficial de la Federación, dates for hard enactment facts. Policy reviews warn that overlapping crime intelligence customers among the CNI, Guardia Nacional, service desks, and the FGR risk duplication or blind spots. Diputados Law Library consolidations anchor the Ley de Seguridad Nacional, the CNI organic statutes, and Senado security agendas referenced in reform transcripts on signals modernization. CIA, Factbook, and State Department pages stay non-operational baselines. Liaison annexes stay institution named only and gob.mxcn. iPortal language mirrors prevention themes through the 2020s. Legislative calendars still show reform bills whenever committee dockets reopen, with staff cross-checking floor transcripts before narration treats timing claims as settled facts. CISEN. CISEN. The Centro de Investigación y Seguridad Nacional, anchored the principal civilian federal intelligence service of the Mexican executive from 1989 onward. Statutory replacement arrived inside the 2017 to 2019 reform window that also rewrote national security law. It supplied domestic and foreign intelligence to protect national security and support presidential and cabinet decisions. Counterintelligence and threat assessment authorities shifted as statutes changed across administrations. Strategic and operational reporting channels, liaison officers, and institutional databases survived PAN, PRI, and pre-presidency Morena eras alike. CISEN became a symbol of both state capacity and documented abuse in public memory. Mexican media and congressional discourse tied CISEN to political surveillance controversies and organized crime intelligence failures in the 2010s. Congress reorganized CISEN into the CN, instead of a cosmetic tweak, raising questions on database continuity, liaison ties, and foreign agreements. CISEN stayed civilian in character while Army and Navy intelligence ran parallel under separate organic authorities. Former director Guillermo Valdez Castellanos later published memoir-level commentary on cartel politics and intelligence limits. Those writings illustrate long-run culture debates over the old service. Today, CISEN is defunct as a brand yet still anchors explainers on personnel pipelines, legal culture, and public distrust that forced the CNI's rewritten framework. Historical Diario official entries plus the Cámara de Diputados Law Library Index remain the strongest anchors for narrating the CISEN to CN. I shift without drifting into gossip. CISEN oversight and multilayer federal intelligence transition. Chronic accountability gaps documented in civil society reporting fed the appetite for statutory replacement rather than rebranding alone. International human rights commentary periodically references surveillance and due process at a high level without replacing Mexican domestic audit trails. Senate and chamber commissions on national security, governance, and human rights hosted hearings on reforms and complaints whenever scandal cycles peaked. Post-replacement oversight debates highlighted inherited liaison ties with foreign partners that need fresh citations before narration treats them as unchanged facts. Academic history still describes CISEN as the name predecessor audiences invoked during surveillance politics debates. CISEN therefore explains why Mexico chose a rewritten organic law instead of a cosmetic name change. Decades of legislative fights over intelligence budgets and congressional access to secrets framed CISEN as both indispensable and politically toxic whenever elections neared. Allegations of misuse for political targeting resurfaced across cycles in the 2000s and 2010s. Explainers still chain each claim to investigated or reported records instead of verdict language. Academic legal histories treat CISEN as the shorthand brand Mexicans remember when discussing who watched whom. Public memory still links CISEN-era scandals to questions on database retention, whistleblower protections, and whether oversight committees received enough classified material to matter. Policy memoirs contrast CISEN's operational reporting culture with the CNI's post-2018 statutory language on civilian control. Research checklists still point auditors toward DOF. Promulgations and diputados consolidations whenever leadership titles or subunit names change mid-administration. Open policy summaries flag CISEN-era liaison agreements with foreign services as continuity risks during CNC transition planning. Yet each agreement still needs its own dated file before narration treats continuity as proven. Cartel war intensity across the 2000s expanded CISEN mission space until civilian police capacity crises pulled military intelligence into the same operational picture. CISEN's civilian label never removed parallel SEDENA and SEMAR intelligence, so Mexican federal intelligence always behaved like a layered system instead of a single hierarchy. Inteligencia militar within SEDENA, Army and Air Force intelligence and counterintelligence live inside the Secretaría de la Defensa Nacional under the public label Inteligencia Militar. 20th century internal security and Cold War counterinsurgency history shaped long-standing roots. After 2006, cartel violence pushed military operations toward the center of federal strategy. Civilian police capacity was overwhelmed in wide stretches of the country, so intelligence support moved with deployments. The mission is military intelligence, counterintelligence, and information support to protect forces and sustain campaigns. National security tasks arrive through law and executive order rather than through prosecutor-led case files. Analysts and collectors focus on order of battle against armed groups, while force protection covers convoys and bases, and cartographic and geospatial work supports terrain-focused estimates. Signals intelligence appears only where military law authorizes it, without inventing classified inventories. Liaison links run to the CNI, the Guardia Nacional, and Secretaría de Marina during joint campaigns. Publicly acknowledged military operations in Michoacán, Tamaulipas, Guerrero, and Sinaloa illustrate planning cycles where intelligence shapes targeting packets at an unclassified level. The 2014 Iguala disappearance of 43 students drew accountability debates over military records inside released investigation summaries. Constitutional politics across the 2010s and 2020s repeatedly examined expanding military roles in public security, and intelligence support moved with that bundle. SEDENA ranks among the largest defense bureaucracies in Latin America, even when open data rarely breaks out an intelligence-only personnel slice. Defense spending tables publish aggregate peso totals, while intelligence lines usually stay merged inside broader secretariat budgets. Compared with SEMAR, SEDENA intelligence emphasizes land corridors, mountain laboratories, and inland transport rather than sea lanes. Compared with the CNI, it is service intelligence for military operations, not the statutory Civilian National Intelligence Center. Compared with the FGR, it does not exist to file charges in federal court. SEDENA campaigns and joint fusion, scale, accountability, and joint fusion stay visible whenever theater cells, fusion rooms, and prosecutors argue over the same intelligence traffic. Those debates still echo inside unclassified summaries whenever defense commissions revisit classified access rights. U.S. training and equipment programs historically included intelligence support disciplines for vetted military units under unclassified program descriptions. Inter-American human rights materials sometimes reference military involvement in investigations at a high level. Mexican defense commissions in the Cámara de Diputados and Senado debate military roles and oversight access to classified information. CJNG versus Sinaloa conflict spikes remain shorthand in open security reporting for why headquarters keeps demanding fused intelligence from theater cells. The 2018 Guardia Nacional creation wave increased demand for fusion between police tips and military intelligence products under executive orders that shifted across administrations. Joint tasking still requires deconfliction whenever cabinet cells, CNI analysts, and SEDENA regional desks chase the same corridor kingpins. Theater-level intelligence cells tied to military regions still translate national tasking into local pattern analysis without publishing facility addresses. Wilson Center's scholarship on militarization often cites post-2006 escalation as the hinge that made intelligence support inseparable from convoy escorts and highway patrol missions. SEDENA intelligence therefore feeds joint campaigns while lawyers argue whether the same data should ever enter trial exhibits unchanged. Classification practices remain a recurring accountability theme whenever civil society groups demand access to military logs tied to human rights cases. Publicly released investigation summaries sometimes mention records retention gaps that complicate civilian oversight without confirming operational sources and methods. SEDENA's scale means even compact intelligence directorates can still dwarf entire civilian agencies when measured by uniformed headcount, though organic charts hide the split. U.S. Merida-era program literature still frames Mexican Army partners as recipients of institution-building advice, where vetted units carry higher diplomatic trust. Mexican constitutional debates continue to stress that intelligence support is not the same legal creature as criminal investigation, even when deployments look like domestic policing. Order of battle work against armed groups still supplies the terrain layer that maritime and financial sensors rarely capture alone. When cabinet-led campaigns surge, SEDENA liaison officers sit beside CNI and GN representatives inside fusion rooms described only at unclassified levels. Intelligentsia Naval within SEMAR. Naval intelligence under the Secretaría de Marina supports maritime domain awareness, port security, and counter-narcotics interdiction planning. Force protection covers the Armada de Mexico. Authorities were updated alongside modern national security law. Headquarters in Mexico City links to coastal naval regions where analysts track smuggling routes across sea, littoral, and riverine interfaces where applicable. Boarding teams and interdiction planners receive fused tips. Cooperation with United States maritime agencies appears in public descriptions of joint exercises and bilateral frameworks. Pacific and Gulf of Mexico coastlines place naval intelligence at the center of cocaine trafficking narratives in open security reporting. Precursor chemical smuggling storylines follow the same maritime lens. The maritime and port threat picture differs from the Army-led inland corridor lens. Public reporting on Pacific port inspection ecosystems such as Manzanillo illustrates how naval intelligence intersects customs workflows and finance intelligence without replacing either institution. Cold War coastal enforcement baselines widened across the early 21st century. The 2010s pushed modernization as traffickers adopted submersibles, go-fast boats, and more complex logistics chains. The 2020s increased pressure for multi-agency fusion with the Guardia Nacional and customs-adjacent bodies in port zones. SEMAR port and ledger tracing. SEMAR follows physical movement at sea, while the Unidad de Inteligencia Financiera follows suspicious financial patterns on ledgers. High-profile seizures at sea and humanitarian disaster responses show the same sensors serving different mission labels. Naval intelligence still supports reconnaissance for logistics and hurricane relief deployments. Wilson Center and other policy analyses note SEMAR's public reputation across Pacific and Gulf coastal states, framed carefully rather than as a universal guarantee. Naval modernization budgets draw congressional scrutiny in Mexico, while U.S. Congress debates partner capacity for maritime monitoring as secondary context. Compared with SEDENA, SEMAR intelligence owns the maritime column and tracks containers and wakes rather than wire transfers. Compared with the CNI, naval intelligence is service intelligence tied to fleets and boarding parties rather than cabinet-wide all-source fusion. Bilateral maritime security cooperation milestones still appear in unclassified program summaries that cite SEMAR public releases. Country overview cross-checks against the CIA World Factbook Mexico page help non-Mexican audiences place Armada de Mexico missions inside wider Latin American defense comparisons. gob.mx, SEMAR communications still emphasize interdiction planning and port security without publishing classified procurement line items. Corruption risk inside port ecosystems remains a documented global smuggling challenge, so Mexican explainers still source any single terminal scandal to dated reporting instead of generalizing. Congressional oversight debates on naval modernization budgets recur whenever fleets need aviation upgrades or patrol hour increases. U.S. Capitol Hill debates on partner maritime monitoring capacity still shape how American aid narratives describe Mexican naval readiness at unclassified levels. Disaster response missions give SEMAR intelligence secondary beats when storms force ISR support for humanitarian logistics rather than narcotics boardings. Riverine interfaces matter wherever traffickers exploit inland waterways that connect to coastal offload points described in open security literature. SEMAR analysts therefore stitch radar tracks, boarding reports, and customs tips into packages that land desks at SSPC-led fusion forums when crises demand unified tasking. The same trafficking organization may appear on a SEMAR plot and again inside UIF wire typologies, so analysts still deconflict identities before raids move inland. High-profile at-sea seizures remain animation-friendly examples whenever narrators stay inside confirmed press dates. Pacific versus Gulf geography still splits workload between naval regions, even when headquarters messaging stays centralized in Mexico City. Guardia Nacional. The Guardia Nacional is a federal public security force whose operational birth commonly sits in 2019 policy timelines tied to 2018 constitutional creation debates. Original design framed a civilian institution with military integration. Later amendments shifted command and oversight lines in ways Mexican Congress continues to revisit, so any single civilian-led label dates quickly. Headquarters-level command and control in Mexico City coordinates regional deployment cells across the country. Core missions span patrol, interdiction, guarding sites, and federal backup. The real question is whether units convert tips, arrests, and surveillance into specialist follow-on packages. The service plugs into tiered national command fusion rooms that chain cameras, dispatch consoles, and federal databases. Public federal security brochures describe that pattern at a high level. The same interfaces still support Fiscalía General de la República investigations through police channels when orders assign those tasks. Cabinet-led joint campaigns keep lines open to military intelligence desks. Unlike the CNI, the Guardia Nacional is primarily an operational security force, not the strategic all-source producer for cabinet warning products. It absorbed much former federal police human capital and some functions, a continuity choice that drew intense media scrutiny between 2019 and 2022. Highway checkpoint campaigns illustrate how detection nodes hand intelligence forward rather than ending at a traffic fine. Daily patrol grids make the Guardia Nacional the most visible federal uniformed sensor network when tips flow cleanly towards specialized agencies. Policy literature often cites tens of thousands of personnel. Yet, exact totals belong only to official Guardia Nacional statistics releases or Secretaría de Hacienda y Crédito Público budget tables, once verified. 2020 through 2023 windows brought public controversies over use of force, training stress, and coordination failures whenever sourced reporting exists for each claim. Legislative amendment cycles on military participation inside the force require fresh constitutional language before narration treats any snapshot as permanent. Versus state police, the institution is federal. Versus the FGR, it secures scenes and detains suspects more often than it builds trial dossiers. Human rights groups document incidents that still require investigation with attribution rather than verdict. Institutional immaturity risk rises when rapid growth outpaces vetting and supervision. Guardia Nacional Fusion Oversight. U.S. oversight literature still discusses vetting and professionalism of Mexican federal forces inside cooperation programs tied to the 2018 constitutional debate and 2019 operational birth timeline. Amendment fights mean official records require fresh diario official promulgations before command lines count as static facts. Civil society lawsuits tested data governance whenever camera density plans expanded faster than privacy rulings. Checkpoints and patrol grids feed C4 and C5 fusion ecosystems described in public brochures that chain dispatch consoles. Federal databases and video walls join that chain without claiming citywide omniscience. When interfaces break, deadlock returns between patrol tips and cabinet tasking, so the force functions as the everyday sensor mesh above which strategic analysts argue. When fusion software licenses lag, dispatchers revert to voice nets that cannot share biometric hits in real time. That technical debt quietly shapes how much intelligence reaches prosecutors the same night of an arrest. Secretaría de Seguridad y Protección Ciudadana policy staff still rely on those feeds when designing National Control Center expansions. Rapid scale-up stories from 2019 through 2022 still highlight training pipeline stress whenever journalists compare graduation timelines with deployment orders. Gob.m. X. Guardia Nacional portal pages still list patrol, site security, and federal support missions without branding a separate intelligence service. SHCP budget binders remain the place to verify peso totals before narrating any single-year spending spike tied to the force. Human rights training debates recur whenever amendment cycles touch military participation inside patrol units. U.S. GAO-style cooperation narratives still treat Mexican federal partners as nodes, where vetting standards determine access to sensitive American systems. Community tip lines, body camera programs, and dispatch consoles together describe how GN intelligence behaves more like sensor fusion than like all-source analysis. When GN checkpoints flag a vehicle, follow-on handoffs still depend on whether CNI, FGER, or military task forces own the next move under cabinet orders. Oversight dockets in both chambers still revisit whether GN data retention rules match Comisión Nacional de los Derechos Humanos expectations after scandal spikes. Fiscalía General de la República. The Fiscalía General de la República is Mexico's autonomous federal attorney general's office. 2018 constitutional reform strengthened independence, appointment rules, and oversight boards away from the older Procuraduría General de la República model. It sits in Mexico City and leads federal criminal prosecution for organized crime, corruption, and high-impact violence. Investigators build case files, wiretap where law allows, run forensic science, and manage witness programs while tracing finances with specialized units. Those unit titles change with statutes, so current org charts need gob.mx verification before narration prints names. Criminal intelligence databases serve trial-ready evidence rules rather than policy-only warning channels. Prosecutors interact with foreign partners through treaties and mutual legal assistance processes at a high public level. Here is the real question. Cartel extraditions and explosive corruption probes still saturate reporting. Each docket still needs its own dated court record before narration treats outcomes as final. Compared with the CNI, the FGR must optimize for courtroom admissibility rather than classified national estimates alone. Compared with the Guardia Nacional, the FGR investigates while uniformed services more often secure scenes and detain suspects under separate orders. Judicial bottlenecks, witness protection limits, and selective enforcement accusations appear in public debate as structural pressures even when intelligence exists. The office remains the only institution here whose core statutory output is supposed to be criminal cases instead of intelligence estimates. U.S. congressional interest tracks extraditions and cooperation cases as secondary context. institutional clashes with other federal bodies over case ownership and intelligence sharing appear in reputable reporting whenever task forces compete. Witness protection capacity constraints remain a documented friction point. Corruption risks inside prosecutorial workflows feed public cynicism toward impunity narratives. Oral trial capacity, forensic lab funding, and criminal procedure reforms remain live subjects in Mexican congressional oversight dockets. Prosecutorial staffing and laboratory throughput figures belong in narration only when FGR annual reports or verified appropriations tables supply them. Mutual legal assistance processes still frame how investigators request banking traces that begin inside Unidad de Inteligencia Financiera reporting streams, FGR databases, and courtroom systems. The FGR therefore translates intelligence-like information into courtroom consequences when admissibility rules allow. Transition narratives from the Procuraduría General de la República to the Fiscalía General de la República remain a governance textbook beat. Autonomy rules changed how long attorneys general serve. Wiretap regimes stay legally bounded, so investigators cannot treat CNI-style warning traffic as automatic trial exhibits without judicial orders. Joint financial investigations still lean on SHCP-published regulatory circulars, whenever banks tighten reporting thresholds after statutory reforms. High-profile prosecutions of politicians and cartel figures still supply public examples whenever narrators date each case file to confirmed filings. FGR criminal intelligence staff still manage databases that must satisfy chain of custody and disclosure rules. Foreign intelligence products rarely face. Mutual legal assistance paperwork still governs how Mexican prosecutors request overseas banking traces tied to laundering typologies flagged by the UIF. Witness protection shortfalls still appear in oversight literature as reasons intelligence-rich investigations stall short of convictions. Selective enforcement accusations belong in narration only when attributed to named oversight reports or hearings, rather than to anonymous rumor. U.S. Capitol Hill interest in extradition outcomes still frames how American audiences measure FGR effectiveness without substituting for Mexican judicial statistics. FGR specialized squads still rotate names whenever statutes reorganize organized crime portfolios, so explainers defer to current gob.mxfgr pages for titles. Case ownership fights between federal institutions still surface in press reporting whenever two agencies claim jurisdiction over the same kingpin network. Oral trial reform still pressure labs and court dockets to absorb evidence volumes that intelligence agencies generate faster than courts can hear. Secretaría de Seguridad y Protección Ciudadana. The SSPC is the Federal Civilian Cabinet Ministry. Dated to 2018, creation decrees in that reform era alongside the CNI. Guardia Nacional creation unfolded in the same reform wave, anchoring how policy memory couples those institutions. Exact diario official lines should confirm each merger detail before narration treats portfolio splits as frozen. It coordinates federal civilian security policy, institutional planning, and national information systems that knit police, emergency services, and federal operations support into one architecture. Officials design crime prevention programs, police professionalization roadmaps, and interfaces between national security tasks and everyday policing. The ministry holds oversight or support relationships with the Guardia Nacional depending on current legal assignment language after amendment cycles. It governs federal-level tiered command fusion ecosystems whose public descriptions emphasize cameras, dispatch consoles, and analytics layers without claiming omniscient coverage. Cabinet campaigns pull the Secretariat together with Secretaría de Gobernación, SEMAR, SEDENA, the FGR, and the CNI when crises demand unified tasking. National earthquake and hurricane mobilizations show the same coordination machinery used for disasters, which gives visual variety beyond cartel maps alone. Compared with the CNI, SSPC is not organic national intelligence, though coordination inevitably overlaps at crisis cells. Think tank analogies to the United States Department of Homeland Security stay loose because Mexican constitutional logic differs on military and police roles. Congressional appropriations debates repeatedly surface funding for control center expansion, maintenance, and data governance controversies tied to civil society suits. National Security Strategy releases and updates give dated anchors whenever publication years are verified against official PDFs. Technology procurement scandals belong in narration only when a specific sourced example is attached. Coordination does not equal control, so large service ministries can still outrun policy ministries in fast-moving emergencies. SSPC therefore behaves as the glue ministry inside explainers even when it is not the case, owner for every headline crime. SSPC data systems and ethics, policy designed for C4 and C5 style architectures flows through this lane, while ethics fights continue over surveillance scope. The Secretariat's success at unifying fragmented federal security data remains contested in open literature. SEGOB coordination interfaces appear whenever cabinet crisis cells blend interior ministry tools with SSPC-led information platforms. Budget lines for security technology projects can surface inside Secretaría de Hacienda documentation whenever narration ties peso figures to verified tables. GOB.MXSSPC portal program descriptions still emphasize prevention, professionalization, and national emergency coordination, without pretending the ministry owns every sensor feed in Mexico. Data governance controversies still spike whenever civil society lawsuits challenge camera retention or analytics vendors named in public dockets. Congressional funding fights still decide whether C5 expansions receive maintenance money or only capital budgets for new screens. National emergency coordination during earthquakes still demonstrates how SSPC-linked systems mobilize federal responders when storms or tremors overwhelm state capacities. Cabinet reorganization still remind narrators to verify portfolio merges on GOB.MX org charts before describing SSPC as the sole owner of GN policy. Secretaría de Gobernación interfaces still matter because interior ministry crisis tools overlap SSPC-led information platforms during nationwide emergencies. Wilson Center analyses still cite SSPC as the coordination hub outsiders picture when they ask how Mexico wires federal agencies together. Technology ethics debates still track whether analytics layers create surveillance overreach even when brochures promise community safety outcomes. SHCP published security technology budget lines still belong in narration only when tables are date-stamped and verified. SSPC-linked fusion brochures still describe dispatch consoles, federal databases, and video walls as chained systems rather than as omniscient city brains. Policy staff still translate cabinet guidance into procurement language that auditors later dissect whenever projects slip deadlines. Unidad de Inteligencia Financiera. The Unidad de Inteligencia Financiera is Mexico's financial intelligence unit, housed under the Secretaría de Hacienda y Crédito Público framework. Public.gov.mxuef pages describe reporting, analysis, and regulatory coordination duties. The unit tracks money laundering, terrorist financing, and sanctions evasion patterns. The institution matured across 1990s and 2000s reforms that align Mexico with Financial Action Task Force expectations on reporting quality and international peer exchanges. Headquarters functions concentrate in Mexico City. Analysts receive suspicious transaction reports from banks and non-bank financial institutions under official regulatory terminology. They produce intelligence packages for prosecutors and supervisors, and they coordinate with the Fiscalía General de la República on financial crime cases. They swap information with foreign financial intelligence units through standard FIUNET-style channels, when public acknowledgments allow that wording. Asset forfeiture ecosystems receive support where law allows exact Spanish statutory phrasing. Mutual evaluation cycles, remediation plans, and follow-up reviews on the Financial Action Task Force Mexico country page supply external pressure. That pressure shapes domestic credibility and banking stability debates inside Mexico City policy circles. Cartel finance grew more complex with fentanyl profits, trade-based laundering, and crypto instruments across the 2020s in open policy literature. Public waves of account freezes and sanctions alignment arguments periodically highlight the unit's leverage when cases stay sourced to filings or reputable economic press. Compared with the CNI, the UIF delivers financial intelligence with regulatory and prosecutorial interfaces rather than broad national security estimates alone. Compared with SEMAR, the same trafficking organization may appear once on a radar plot and again as wire transfers flagged for analysis. Reporting quality gaps from banks and non-bank financial institutions still enable laundering when supervision lags. Political pressure allegations surface during sensitive investigations and belong in narration only with attribution. Mexican Congress debates anti-money laundering law reforms and financial regulation on recurring schedules. High-value freezes tied to politically exposed persons' investigations require the same careful sourcing discipline as any criminal headline. UIF laundering and cross-border work. FUNIT-style channels describe the standard architecture for swapping typologies with foreign counterparts when treaties permit. Anti-money laundering statutes in Mexico evolve on recurring congressional schedules tied to FATF, follow-up timelines, rather than arbitrary reform moods. 2020's public debates linked cartel finance with fentanyl profits, trade-based laundering, and new crypto instrument typologies in open economic policy literature. Binational financial enforcement narratives between Mexico City and Washington surface when sanctions alignment or major freezes draw cross-border commentary. The UIF therefore supplies the fastest paper trail bridge between cartel operations and courtroom-ready evidence when reporting pipelines stay clean. Misaligned customer lists across agencies still make Mexico's security state talk past itself, even when every censor works on paper. Mutual evaluation follow-up letters from the Financial Action Task Force name remediation deadlines that Mexican banks quote in risk committees, even when prosecutors stay silent. Suspicious transaction report volumes fluctuate whenever exchange houses face new reporting thresholds after statutory reforms. Trade-based laundering typologies exploit misinvoiced container lines that SEMAR inspectors sometimes examine while UIF analysts reconcile the same bills of lading against bank wires. Politically exposed person reviews sometimes freeze accounts tied to governors or mayors, which forces narrators to separate court findings from press speculation. Sanctions alignment debates spike whenever United States Treasury designations mention Mexican currency exchange networks. Crypto kiosk reporting rules remain a moving target across the 2020s, so compliance officers and UIF desk chiefs reread the same circulars each quarter. Asset forfeiture judges still ask whether intelligence packages meet chain of custody rules before signing seizure orders. When every agency agrees on the same account number, courtroom wins still depend on whether witnesses survive long enough to testify. SHCP budget annexes remain the authoritative place to verify peso lines before narrating any new technology procurement tied to financial supervision. UIF analysts still coordinate with banking supervisors whenever circulars tighten reporting thresholds for exchange houses or fintech wallets. FATF mutual evaluation annexes still supply the closest thing to external scorecards, even though they cannot replace Mexican congressional oversight. United States Treasury enforcement waves still reshape how Mexican banks calibrate risk whenever cross-border designations mention currency exchange networks. Fentanyl profit laundering narratives still push UIF desks toward trade-based typologies that require customs bills and maritime seizure data from SEMAR channels. Sanctions evasion debates still intersect with diplomatic timing whenever Mexico aligns administrative freezes with multinational enforcement calendars. FATF. Follow-up letters still name concrete remediation deadlines that Mexican banks cite when tightening automated alert rules for exchange house typologies. Congressional banking committees still debate whether statute updates track those deadlines fast enough to protect correspondent relationships. Each reported typology still needs its own dated file before narration treats cross-border enforcement waves as finished story arcs.